Okay, we're up and live. Okay, today we have a return guest, Dave Collins. Dave is the Director of Solution Consulting and Strategic Alliances at OneStream. In episode 4 of CPM Customer Success, Dave and I discussed the CPM landscape and why businesses are moving to a unified CPM platform in OneStream. So check out episode 4 if you haven't yet. It's a great baseline for what we'll be covering today and covering in future episodes. And today we're really going to focus on a comparison of CPM products, and I'll get into that in a minute. But let's welcome you, Dave. Welcome back to the CPM Customer Success Podcast.
Thank you, Andy. Good to be here.
Yeah, great. So today I'd like to dive into a comparison between Oracle Hyperion and Oracle's point solutions as compared to OneStream's unified platform. So that'll be a topic today. So Dave, you've built a career in CPM. You've been, I think you started and focused on Hyperion products. So I think no other person I'd rather chat with to kind of compare the two than yourself. But let's get into it. Could you start by just telling us in the audience a bit about the Hyperion's kind of background, what it is, how it came about, and then how your career intersected with it?
Sure, happy to. So back in the day, you had Hyperion software and you had Arbor software. Arbor bought out Hyperion software and they renamed the new company Hyperion Solutions. The idea was to bring Arbor Essbase together, which was more of an analytic platform, with Hyperion, who had planning applications, consolidation applications, and try to forge what eventually became performance management. Business performance management was what they coined back then. Gartner called it corporate performance management. And then, of course, after Hyperion was bought by Oracle and SAP bought Business Objects, everything kind of morphed into enterprise performance management. So you have the three PMs. BPM is business, CPM is corporate. That's what we still call it. That's what Gartner still calls it. And then EPM is enterprise. And you've got Oracle and SAP and some of the others in that regard. The Hyperion experience for me was actually very cool because we solved problems with specific applications, and then we could augment that with analytic capabilities that would hopefully move people away from the need to do a lot of spreadsheets, which is more of a personal productivity sort of a tool. The effort back then with Hyperion, and I moved from being a pre-sales consultant into being a domain leader for analytics and for performance management. The effort back then was to try and bring together what was multiple modules or applications into a single experience. And I say experience because initially it was all front end. You still behind the scenes had multiple modules. So there was a closed consolidation application. There was a planning, budgeting, forecasting application. There were other ancillary applications that would support those two core competencies within performance management. And you had a front end that made it look like it was just one thing. The second stage before we were bought by Oracle was to go back and now fix the underlying bits, bring it all together into a common platform. We just never got there.
Gotcha. So it sounds like OneStream has really understood the different frustrations with those point solutions. And my kind of recollection of the OneStream founders' mission was OneStream was really born out of those frustrations. So it's Oracle's kind of lack of innovation post-acquisition. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about those challenges that the OneStream founders saw in Hyperion and how that led to building the OneStream platform.
The interesting bit is that OneStream, or the stream in OneStream, actually came originally from a company called Upstream that was purchased by Hyperion. And Upstream's specialty was connecting all of those dots. So we have multiple modules for close consolidation, multiple modules for financial planning and analytics, and you have Essbase to do cleanup work, if you will, for all sorts of other analytic needs. Upstream as a product, and it became financial data quality management, or FDM, FDM-EE in the Oracle world, was meant to interconnect all those modules. So the blank stream or upstream OneStream really became connective capability for a bit of a modular mess in the Hyperion world. Upstream being bought by Hyperion and then being introduced to hopefully the effort toward a platform-based approach, they combined with some of the Hyperion folks coming out of Oracle, because to be honest, Oracle wasn't really a great experience from a work standpoint. When they left Oracle, they decided to progress the idea of performance management. And the first thought was, well, let's continue what we started at Hyperion by building a platform-based approach, so that instead of having a series of modules that we have to stitch together, which we know we can do, why don't we reinvent the idea of performance management so that it's one application fueled by a platform? What would it take to make that happen? And the interesting question that they all had was, okay, this will obviously take us a bit longer because it hasn't been done before. We can get to market faster by doing more of the same, but the decision was made to not do more of the same because that was not going to be in the best interest of the customers. And that's where the idea of customer success really was born. OneStream is about customer success, and we felt, or they felt, now that I'm here, I just actually celebrated my 4-year anniversary with OneStream. The idea OneStream founders had was to engineer something that could give much greater customer success, and we felt that the idea of having a platform to support a single application would be the way to go.
Well, congrats on the 4-year anniversary. I wasn't aware
Thank
of
you.
that. So,
Yeah, thank you.
congrats. So you kind of touched on the Hyperion modules, I think was the word you used, and
Yeah.
really the separate solutions. That creates technical debt, and it sounds like upstream was meant to stitch that stuff together and try to minimize that debt. But OneStream's approach is really to eliminate that technical debt. So maybe you could talk about and explain how all that technical debt got manifested and the type of impact it has on a Hyperion customer.
Sure. So if you think of the notion of technical debt, it's additional work product. If I have multiple applications or multiple modules, multiple anything, I have to connect them together at some point. Something as simple as my close process, where I'm taking account information out of perhaps various ERP systems, subledgers, general ledgers, and then in simple terms, aggregating that together to get a number. But then having another set of applications that support planning, budgeting, forecasting, where I would need to move actual data over to that planning, budgeting, forecasting world of applications or modules, so that I could do analysis of variance, do a comparison, if you will, of here we thought this is what we were going to do in the budget, the original budget. We thought this is what we were going to do per the forecast that could be each month, each quarter, on a rolling basis. Wow, the numbers aren't the same. What just happened there? So the idea of upstream was to try and connect that data by mapping it from application to application. The idea of OneStream is, let's invent a way for us to have structures that we know will be different given at the very least functional scenario. Like for actuals, I have many more accounts in the list that I'm worried about versus my strategic plan tends to be more of the back of the envelope. We think we're going to do this in revenue, this in expense. That simple thought process for a strategic plan, but it might be longer term versus here's what we actually did. So as an example, you might have 1,000 accounts that you're closing for the close consolidation process, whereas for your strat plan, you might have 100 accounts. And now you have to map that disparity. That disparity tends to be functional in nature. It tends to be, by entity. I might have an organization that is manufacturing a product, but it's also selling the product. And then there's a corporate entity that has to watch over simple things like revenue and expense. For the corporate side, I don't really need all of the detail that manufacturing needs. Manufacturing needs to map to that summary information that corporate has. So how do we make that work? In every world outside of OneStream, that means you have a separate application with separate metadata for each of those functional needs or each of those scenario needs, like actual versus plan versus strategic plan and more. With OneStream, what we've done is created a way to extend a dimension given something. It could be by scenario, it could be by entity, it could be by time period. So we can do some really interesting things in the management of metadata in a single dimension that provides that variability. And what I mean by variability is I know that my manufacturing group want to look at their account structure in one way, the summary of which is common with corporate, but I need to be able to extend or expand. And that's where extensibility as a feature came about. That feature now lends itself to what we call unification, meaning I'm unifying. Wow, in the Oracle consulting days, I was managing a big project at Kraft Foods where we had more than 450 different applications, modules in the Oracle world that had to be stitched together. In the OneStream world, you wouldn't have to do that. You'd have one single application because we could handle the disparity of the metadata needs with our metadata approach. So that really was the initial invention that made us different from everybody else and remains the major functional difference between us and everybody else.
So in Oracle's cloud solution, I think they call their new Hyperion EPM Cloud, or I get confused on the acronyms sometimes in the rebranding. But are those still multiple cloud applications that are having to be kind of pushed there?
So what they did, it was kind of interesting in my 4 years at OneStream, and I provide assistance to partners like Nova. That's how we met. So when we were recruiting what became Nova Advisory, my team would go through a process of educating Nova on what we do, how we do it, how we message it, so that you could have a consistent message to our message with the nuance of how you approach consulting. One of the things that we do is called a vendor comparison. It's an education session where we put here's OneStream, here's Oracle, here's OneStream, here's SAP, here's OneStream, here's Anaplan, and we compare, contrast. The biggest point of contrast is that extensibility, that unification that I just talked about. In the case of Oracle, within the last 4 years, they responded, I think, to our approach, which is platform, by changing their terminology from applications and modules to platform, which is an easy fix. You just change the words and then it all sounds the same. However, when you look underlying and go into the documentation, in fact, before the session, in preparation for the session, I was off reading the Oracle documentation just to see what had changed, and really nothing much has changed. They lifted and shifted as a starting point each of the application-based modules in the Hyperion EPM world up into a cloud, separate clouds, and you now still have to integrate between those clouds. And back in the day, I haven't done this in a while, but in my consulting times, that meant pulling data from, say, the consolidation cloud down to a machine that's local and then pushing it up to the other cloud. So there was this middle layer, if you will, that it was somebody's machine or server. I believe they now have cloud-to-cloud integration from what I was reading. However, that cloud-to-cloud integration is something that you have to create. It's not an out-of-the-box, because my dimensional structure may be different than from one company to the next. Therefore, I can't anticipate automatically how I'm going to map that structure. And that becomes the key thing, right? So when I was doing consulting after I left Oracle, and I did that as part of that big craft project, the amount of work it took to build the integrations between the modules that were in the clouds was just, it was hours and hours and hours. We were spending at least 6, if not 7 days a week on it. We were spending a good 8 to sometimes 12, 14 hours a day trying to get it all to work. That's technical debt. It's the amount of money in investment in the people time to actually make those integrations happen. And then you have to maintain them, because over time, your account structure is going to change, your product structure is going to change, your entity structure is going to change, and it's going to have this ripple effect throughout that you need to account for. So going in perhaps on a monthly basis, if not more often, and modifying all the metadata. And our approach is the metadata is all in the application. Oracle's approach is you have a metadata library, and then you push out from that hub via spokes. And then you have to use what is formerly FDM, the upstream product, to make sure all of the interconnections for the data is there and working.
Okay. So yeah, in OneStream, you still need ERP data. You still need to load data
Yeah.
in, and a lot of business case for, or a typical scenario we run into is a customer would come to us, or one of Nova's clients would say, "I've got multiple ERPs. I've acquired businesses, and some they're all different, and they have different languages." So maybe you could talk about OneStream's solution for integrations, and how OneStream's solution simplifies those data loads.
Sure. So for one thing, it's included. We know that we're going to have to bring data from underlying source systems up into the OneStream application and perhaps use it multiple times. And by multiple times, I mean that I might bring transactions in to go through a matching exercise and then account reconciliation as part of my record to report or financial close process. I might want to use that same data in a dashboard so I can see day by day what was happening at the transaction or operational level. And then I might also want to use that data to influence the forecast. If I can get to the grain of detail as to what was happening operationally speaking, and then load other data in, not just from the ERP layer, but from, say, the bank, where I'm bringing in interest rates. Because we know that if I'm selling big ticket items, the price of money becomes important. A customer who has to finance something wants to finance it when the rate is closer to 0 than closer to 100. So those influential factors can all be loaded in through that data layer. The engine that we have, or how we refer to the engine, is data quality. So because, as you mentioned, most customers, probably 95% plus, have multiple ERP sources, we're oftentimes bringing seemingly the same data in from different places because there's integration happening down at the operational layer. What I mean by that is I might have a revenue number for the enterprise in one ERP and a revenue number for the enterprise in another ERP, and I need to make sure that they're the same. So as we're bringing that data in, we actually can create a match rule, if you will, that says, hey, is this number equal to this number or within range? Yes or no. If it's within range, then we'll let it move on. Something like the balance sheet, making sure that the balance sheet actually balances before you move through your consolidation would be pretty key and critical. So the ingestion of data using the data quality engine, think of it as ETL plus a sensibility check. We know that certain things, certain factors must be present in order for the data to be correct. What we don't want to have happen, which is typical of applications like this, is you find out down the road after the data has been processed and lands in a report that something doesn't look right, and then you start tracing it back. We'll cut that off, that potential problem off, before we get to it. And if there is a disparity between two systems that should have the same value, we can automate an entry, a journal entry and adjustment that'll negate that difference and then document that we've done that, and perhaps even push it back to the source system if need be.
I noticed in my experience with the Oracle products, performance and response time is an important consideration. I know OneStream's made a lot of advancements with the technology in its platform on not only loading the data like you're talking about, but also consolidating. Can you talk a little bit about that, OneStream's approach, and how it's different?
Sure. So a couple things. First off, let me address the second part of the question. The progression of our platform approach has been pretty unique in the industry in that we have layered progressiveness as we've gone, meaning we started doing the typical sorts of performance management. Then we extended into an analytic capability where we could bring operational data in. That was back in 2019. I was a partner of OneStream back in 2019, and I remember sitting in New Orleans at Splash watching, I think it was Bob Powers up on stage, one of our founders, loading in 100 million transactions in seconds time and then surfacing it in a dashboard. And I thought, this is different. We typically would have to use an analytic tool set to do this, and we'd be outside of the performance management application at that point. Back in the Oracle or the Hyperion days, that would be an S-based function or a BI function, and you'd go to a different screen to have a look at something. Now suddenly I have the ability to be looking at highly summarized data for the month and then drill all the way down to day by day in OneStream, and perhaps even deeper levels of detail than that before I drill back to the source system. So we've been always looking at what's next with an eye toward creating a much more progressive approach to how we model the data. Again, getting outside of the multiple application world into this unified world has afforded us that mindset. So innovations like version 8 of OneStream, where we're now able to take advantage of .NET frameworks available in Microsoft Azure. We use Microsoft Azure as the basis for everything that we do in OneStream. That's been great for us because now we can do things much more quickly. We can take advantage of innovations in the Microsoft Azure platform. And in one case, a customer moved from a consolidation speed of X to X minus 43%. So reducing the amount of time it takes for a consolidation by a tremendous amount. And that's still in a world where we're providing capabilities for customers that wish to do self-hosted, what we used to call on-premises, versus using OneStream SaaS. We'll move this year into a world where we have a dual release strategy, and we'll continue to allow the self-hosted. But for customers that are enjoying it, and that's the vast majority, by the way, customers that are enjoying OneStream SaaS, because we have control of that environment, because we know the footprint that you're sitting in, now we can actually put the pedal to the metal on certain things. We have a capability to bring X number of transactions in throughput through the engine, but when we're in OneStream SaaS and we know we have much more capacity, much more capability in the environment, it'll be twofold, fivefold, tenfold more than that versus those customers that may be self-hosted. So there's a tremendous incentive to move from self-hosted to OneStream SaaS because we can do so much more.
Okay. You touched on vendor comparison and how you highlight for partners the different features and benefits of OneStream against a competing product. As it relates to Oracle Hyperion and the features it lacks, could you just describe anything you mentioned? You touched on extensibility. We touched on integrations and performance. Anything else that kind of jumps out that we haven't spoken about?
You can get into features and functions at more of a point-by-point level and see the differences between the two. First and foremost, extensibility and what it fuels by way of unification is the most important difference between the two because it reduces technical debt. I believe the figure that Doug Orsog's transformation team has come up with is 72% increase in efficiency over whatever the customer was using before, just as it relates to data management. And then if you take data management steps further, the fact that we can bring the volume of operational data into the OneStream application and combine, just for record to report where I'm doing my close consolidation, combine functions like account reconciliation and transaction matching, which is typically a third-party product like a Blackline or a Trintac. There are equivalents in the Oracle world. For SAP, you actually would go and buy Blackline and then increase technical debt through that purchase as well as the integrations. All of that is in OneStream. It's all in the same application. I think the second big innovation is our solution exchange, where we have our marketplace of solutions, partners can create solutions and post them up there. It becomes a revenue opportunity potentially for the partner. And then there's Open Place. Open Place is where we put things like our CPM and ESG blueprints, starting points. That solution exchange concept becomes tremendous for the customer because they can go and look at, I just counted the other day. In fact, when I was in Singapore, somebody asked me how many solutions are in Solution Exchange. And I said, I think it's more than 90, but I should go check. I'll check on the break. There are 97 solutions out there right now between what we provide, which is the majority, and what our partners provide. So a big advantage is that if I want to do people planning, or I want to do transaction matching, or I want to do account reconciliation, or I want to do CapEx planning, or I want to do task management with a Gantt chart, I just go to Solution Exchange and I download it and I plug it into the application, and there's no additional cost unless I'm adding additional users, because our license model is actually quite simple in that regard. So that's the second thing. We have an ability for the customer to go grab something and plug it into the application. And there's an opportunity for our partners then to not only suggest those innovations, but to help guide the customer through that program or that roadmap. You know, let's start here, let's do this next, and this next, and this next. And I think that helps from a customer success standpoint. The third thing that we've done is, again, back to, from a functional perspective, underneath the covers, we've done a really good job of thinking through the flow of data so that when we spin up data in memory, we're only bringing up what is necessary. And this is going to get definitely beneath the covers a little bit, but a lot of the other vendors might dimensionalize the data like we do, but they're going to dimensionalize every year of data. So if I have 10 years of data now, suddenly when I go to do a process, 10 years of data come into memory when I might not need it. By and large, I need to have this year, perhaps this year, next year. And so we've bifurcated the data in such a way that it's compartmentalized and much more efficient for us to bring that data into memory. And the last thing that I'll talk about, the fourth leg of the stool, if you will, is that we've combined or consolidated a lot of reporting function into one. We have this concept of a cube view. What's a cube view? Think of it like a spreadsheet, where I have rows, I have columns, I have a point of view, and then I'm going to have a series of properties, both for the sheet itself or the view itself. And those properties could be format related, like I want the text to be black. If it's negative, I want it to be red. I might want to have, for my variance columns, so getting away from the sheet down to the column level, certain formats. And I can get all the way to the cell level with formatting like that. And the nice thing is that I can then use that object in a dashboard, in a report, in a spreadsheet, and it's just built once. So I'm building one view of data and consuming it through various means without having to rebuild it. And we've built nuance in so that we can say, okay, if you're in Excel, do this. If you're in a PDF, do that. You build that right into the style sheet, if you will, for the cube view. A lot of the other vendors, when I want to have a report that's PDF based, I build that versus building an Excel document versus building a dashboard document. That's 3 times the development.
You know, the user experience is something I've also noticed that, anecdotally, clients, once they've converted from like a Oracle EPM or Hyperion, they really fall in love with OneStream. And that's demonstrated in things like Gartner Peer Insights, which OneStream just scores much higher than an Oracle Hyperion. But any other kind of anecdotes or customer stories on feedback that you could share with our audience?
It's interesting you mentioned Gartner Peer Insights. I like that one, and when we do vendor comparisons, I typically will say, Gartner says this about us. That's Gartner reviewing it. The peer insight process is the customer of OneStream, the customer of Oracle, filling out a form, and then Gartner tallying all that data up, and then allowing us to do compare contrast in a columnar kind of way, and then see all the comments that come through. So that approach is great because you're actually getting the voice of the customer. Another way to get the voice of the customer is to go to one of our events like OneStream Splash And the thing that I noticed 3 years ago when we got back in person for things like Splash, the customers, when they were presenting, were saying some things that you didn't typically hear in a users conference, like, I get to go home at 5 o'clock. I don't have to work on the weekend. I get to have dinner with my family. I got to see my kids play baseball or soccer. It's reduction in workload, which I think is a function of the simplicity of deployment. We're deploying one application. We're reducing all the technical debt. I don't have to dump a bunch of data into a spreadsheet so I can do things to tick and tie because we've provided a lot of that function inside of OneStream. So from a user experience standpoint, I think even prior to some innovations that I'll mention here in a moment, the customer has enjoyed much more time efficiency. We've recently introduced something formerly called browser UX, now called the modern browser experience, MBE, I suppose, where I can use a Mac, I can use a tablet, I can use Chrome, I can use Edge, I can use a browser to have an interface to my OneStream data. By and large, it's been about a Windows desktop. We have recently innovated now and allow for a new experience that actually was a ground up process. So that user experience was based upon feedback that we had been getting over the years, and we created a new way of looking at data in OneStream. And you'll start to see some of that make its way back into the Windows desktop world as well. But I think the really cool thing is that I can now be in my tablet, be on my phone perhaps, interacting with, perhaps signing off on the strategic plan or signing off on one of the close processes through task management, all from a tablet or from a phone. So we're providing even more efficiency from an ease of use standpoint.
And that's one of really the criticisms of Oracle that I've heard over the years is just the lack of innovation. I think a lot they just stop maybe putting money into their applications. So how is OneStream continuing to evolve and really stay ahead of the pack?
So from the very beginning, moving from a multi-application, multi-module world into a single application world was a big difference. And I know when OneStream was first born, 12 years ago, 14 years ago, we attracted a number of former Hyperion salespeople over to OneStream who went back to their customers and said, I'd love to have a conversation with you about what we're doing. It's really a furthering or a progression of what we talked about at Hyperion prior to being acquired by Oracle. And because of the trust that those sales reps had with those customers, the customer was willing to have the conversation. And in many cases, converted from Oracle over to OneStream. Sometimes it was because Oracle was forcing the issue. Back then, cloud was becoming a thing. Moving away from on-premises was much more profitable for Oracle. We talked about that internally. We wanted to get people away from this distribution model and more toward the SaaS or the cloud model. And Oracle at that time had acquired Sun and suddenly had all of this equipment, and they wanted to start making use of that and turning that into a profitable business. So those worlds came together. They started offering much more cloud capabilities. The transition that a customer typically will see from Oracle to OneStream can be a bit nerve-wracking. It's sort of like when I moved away from my traditional PPO with an FSA to a high deductible plan with an HSA. So you're just unsure of that path because you haven't been there before. So helping the customer or the prospect understand that it's going to be okay is usually a function of having them speak with a customer reference. And we have a 98% renewal rate, 98% retention rate of our customers. Our customers tend to be quite happy because we work with them to ensure their success. We have the big book of references that we hand out to a prospective customer when the time's right, so they can make a phone call. And it's all indexed by, former Oracle, former SAP, former Anaplan, so that they can go call people who were similar to their predicament, if you will, and get information that would help them to feel better about their decision. The other thing that we've done from a historical perspective is provide an ability to, in the case of Oracle with HFM in particular, we can read that metadata directly into a OneStream application. And I'm not suggesting that we should do a lift and shift, but I am suggesting that we can give them some comfort initially. And we at Splash this year introduced a new concept called CPM Express, which is not out on the market yet. We're still in development in private preview, working with a few customers and partners. And CPM Express, the very first customer was an Oracle HFM account. They gave us the metadata, we loaded it into a OneStream application, and then we created the extensibility in a new application. So we had a mid-tier application where we simply pulled all the documentation from the HFM application into OneStream. One step, we simply read their output of their metadata, and then we started to create extensibility and do it the right way from a OneStream perspective, and then brought the data in and showed them what that experience would look like. Steps like that, going that extra mile, is really what helps the customer get comfortable around making that decision to move from an Oracle to a OneStream. What typically kicks them or kickstarts them in that process is Oracle telling them, you must do this by this date. Or we had one recently where a customer decided, now customer of OneStream decided, I'm going to go with Oracle EPM Cloud. I like what you're telling us, but I'm going to go with it for now, and we'll revisit. They revisited about a year later after, because of the multi-cloud, multi-module approach, one query across each of those modules was taking a tremendous amount of time, and suddenly they got a notice from Oracle saying, because your queries are taking so long, we're going to have to stop them at X number of hours. And now suddenly the customer found themselves in a position where they had to re-architect using an additional product that Oracle was pitching them to bring the data from each of the modules now into a data mart so that they could do reporting against it. And they remembered back in the Oracle versus OneStream competition that OneStream had everything in the same application. So they called us, we came back in, had a conversation, and they shut down their Oracle EPM cloud and they moved to OneStream.
Wow. So in terms of once the customer is actually up and live, given that the OneStream continues to enhance the platform, I imagine that's customer driven. So maybe you could talk about how OneStream reacts to customer feedback and evolves the platform and needs from there.
Sure. So feedback comes in many different forms and fashions. As you're well aware, being a partner, we have something called Idea Stream. Everything is a stream. So Idea Stream is a place where partners and customers can go without having to call support to just submit an idea. We also take feedback directly. For example, AFL, one of our customers, had a conversation with Tom Shea several years ago about their use of Blackline and wanted to have a OneStream solution in this new thing called the Marketplace that could replace that so that they could do account reconciliations and transaction matching. And so Tom noodled on the idea, created a prototype, eventually created something in private preview, went back to AFL and said, is this what you were looking for? Can we work with you on it? Much like we're working with some of our customers on that notion of CPM Express that I mentioned before. So anywhere from an official process of somebody calls support and says, hey, this isn't working the way I thought it would work, can we change it, to another official approach, not based upon a support problem or issue, but based upon an idea stream, and then just having a conversation with a partner, having a conversation with one of our salespeople or customer success people. And speaking of customer success, we actually attach a person, a representative from a team called customer success, to every single customer before they become a customer. So in Salesforce, where we track all things about an opportunity, when that opportunity hits the 90% level and we're feeling very good about transitioning them from a prospect to a customer, we introduce them to this new person called their customer success representative. So instead of the salesperson fielding all of the input and questions, we allow the salesperson to go off and sell and nurture the customers who wish to do more, and the customer success person watches over the process. When you all are doing projects, you get to know the customer success person as well, and they will work with you to ensure that you're getting what you need, as does alliances. So I think with those various components, we're differentiating ourselves versus everybody else out there. It's not a transactional world to us. The customer is gold to us. The customer becomes the reference for the next customer to us. So we want to drive that customer success as much as we possibly can. It's been challenging as we grow, which is why we've created teams like customer success. We now have an office of the customer where Mark Sims is the chief, if you will, of that particular division of OneStream.
Wonderful. Well, I think that wraps up a great comparison of the two. You've got me convinced, Dave. So I appreciate
You
you
were
as
convinced
always.
already. You're a partner.
I was. No secret there. Any other parting thoughts before we wrap up?
And I just said, my wife listened to the first podcast. I think I told you about this at Splash. She's constantly asking me what it is I do for a living. And so I sent her the podcast and said, have a listen. This is what I do. And she remarked that I don't say, Well, I've now said it, I think 2 or 3 times. I heard myself use that word before. I try to not use the filler
We
words.
can edit that out, so no worries.
Well, keep it, because I think my wife will actually laugh when she listens to this one. I think the thing to close out with is that we are all about driving success for the customer, whether it's an engineering feat like creating extensible dimensionality, which creates the benefit of unification, which eliminates the technical debt. We're also about helping the customers and our partners be as efficient as possible. So, we're coming up with innovations like CPM Blueprint, now CPM Express. That's going to help our partners. That's going to help our customers. We're all about that. And we'd love to get ideas from you, from our other partners, from our customers, so that we can improve upon what we're doing.
Wonderful. Well said. Okay, Dave, as always, we appreciate and value your time. Thanks for sharing today, and we'll see you next time.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care.